Okay, this is The Grass is Greener on WXRW 104.1 FM in Milwaukee. I am the host of the program, Gary Grass. With me is my co-host, Babette Gruneau.
Hi, and today we have Scott Ritter. He's a former Marine Corps officer and a weapons inspector, and a general all-around friend of the show. So, welcome, Scott Ritter.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I think the obvious thing that we need to talk about is um, I guess what the president has labeled the 12-day war, and we'll see if that's really the case or not. But we have Israel, Iran, and the United States. So what is the latest that you've heard on all of this?
Well, the latest I've heard is that the ceasefire is holding but fragile. Iran is expressing anger at continued Israeli overflights over Iranian soil, drone flights over Iranian soil, and they have indicated that if this doesn't stop, then Iran will be compelled to take action. Um, both sides are claiming victory, which is a curious thing since both sides were desperate to have a ceasefire, which suggests that both sides were taking more damage than they were expecting. Um, I mean, it was an illegal war of aggression carried out by Israel against Iran. There was no justification under international law, and any the defenders of the strike say they did it to neutralize Iran's nuclear weapons potential. But the fact of the matter is, as a U.S. intelligence estimate uh, indicated today, we didn't do anything to Iran's real nuclear potential. They had evacuated the high capacity centrifuges, the enriched material, um, and sensitive equipment that could be used to convert uranium hexafluoride gas into uranium metal, which is usable in a bomb. So, it just seems ridiculous that this war took place to get rid of a capability Iran was prepared to give up at the negotiating table. And all we've done is make them mad and make them more inclined to leave the non-proliferation treaty and seek nuclear weapons than if this war hadn't happened.
I'm kind of wondering if it wasn't more for uh, regime change than just getting rid of the bomb and that, or since they didn't even have a bomb to get rid of yet. And they just kind of, Israel and the US kind of used the issue of the bomb as a excuse.
Well, it's clear that the Israeli attack, the initial attack, had a regime change component. The Israelis made a concerted effort at killing senior Revolutionary Guard command leadership, and it's alleged that they even took a run at killing Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader. I think and then they combined that with a so-called shock and awe campaign of, you know, not only attacking Iranian nuclear infrastructure, but making a big deal of, terrorizing Tehran. I think their goal was to have Khamenei dead, the IRCG leadership killed, and a president and his foreign minister who were already possessed, moderate tendencies, panicked in a scared Iranian population, and because the day after the surprise attack, Israel made a very strange announcement saying that they were asking the Iranians to stand aside and let Israel just destroy the nuclear facilities, and then everything would be okay. Um, they didn't realize that they hadn't achieved regime change and that the Iranians are actually rallying around the government and they hadn't destroyed the nuclear facilities. But I agree with you that this was a regime change action, and it appears to be one that the United States was complicit in. We have the President of the United States making a number of statements regarding regime change and indicating that we know where Ali Khamenei is, and insinuating that somehow that meant that we could get him anytime we wanted to. You have Lindsey Graham, an ally of the president, who was literally just yesterday on the floor of the Senate advocating for regime change. So I think you're 100% correct. Regime change was definitely part of the plan and may still be the plan. I remind people that at the end of Desert Storm back in 1991, after we had defeated the Iraqi army, liberated Kuwait, and then in April imposed an inspection regime on Iraq to get rid of their weapons of mass destruction. This wasn't enough for Israel. And in March of 1991, Uri Segei, the head of the Israeli Military Intelligence Service, Amman, recommended to the prime minister and the war cabinet that the only way you were going to prevent Saddam from being a perpetual threat to the state of Israel was to kill Saddam. And they actually began a plan to assassinate Saddam that was supposed to be implemented in November of 1993. Their final dress rehearsal before putting the plan into action went bad. 5 soldiers were killed, and the plan was canceled. But Israel was continuing to plan on killing Saddam Hussein up through 1994. I led a mission to Israel in 1994 on behalf of the United Nations, where I met with Uri Segei and sought to prevail upon him how it would be better to disarm Iraq than to kill Saddam. And we got the Israelis to agree. And 4 years later, the Israelis had dropped their threat assessment of Iraq from being the number 1 threat to Israel to number 6 or number 8. They also changed their assessment of Saddam Hussein from being an irrational actor who would forever be a threat to Israel to being a rational player who could be dealt with so long as he didn't have weapons of mass destruction. And the reason why I bring that in there is I think that even though right now there is a tendency on both the United States and Israel to look at regime change as the ideal, if there can be a deal made with Iran's nuclear program that's acceptable to all parties, I think it's possible to get both Israel and the United States to walk away from regime change and accept Iran, in its current manifestation.
I'm actually a bit surprised by that. I mean, it seems to me like, Iran's leadership, say what you want about, aspects of their policies, but it seems like, we've been in this story before where they've been hit by Israel and they have, been very measured in their responses. They have appeared to be like the adult in the room and being very, very cautious about getting pulled into a large confrontation, and was willing to accept certain losses, engage in some face saving tit for tat, and then kind of drop it for a while, right? And it's the rhetoric seemed to have been sort of just keeping up with the kind of same. I mean, maybe I'm having source amnesia in terms of where this rhetoric is coming from, but I still hear plenty of these stories about how Iran is the irrational actor and they're insane and they're unpredictable and you have to completely disarm them. Whereas it seems like Israel has really been the actor that's been far more unpredictable and unsteady and could just attack any one of its neighbors at any moment.
Well, look, that was the assessment given to Saddam Hussein at the end of the Gulf War. And as anybody knows who has studied that war, Saddam's decision to go into Kuwait was not an irrational decision, but a decision that was made only after he reached out to the Arab League and all of Iraq's neighbors to try and, or all Kuwait's neighbors to try and get Kuwait to stop carrying out an economic war designed to destroy the Iraqi economy by artificially lowering the price of oil below the threshold needed by Iraq to repay its debts. Um, so Iraq was compelled to do that. Iraq also was very concerned about Israel launching attacks against Iraq's nuclear infrastructure, and so you had the Iraqis making certain moves in the ballistic missile field that were designed to deter Israeli aggression. But at the end of the day, um, this was not an irrational act caused by a madman who was seeking regional, hegemony, is the way it was painted by the United States and others after the fact, but rather the last resort of a nation that had been pushed into a corner by Kuwait, Israel, and the United States. And so, when we look at, Iran today, yes, I think most observers who are knowledgeable of the true circumstances see Iran as a rational player, responsible player, maybe the only rational and responsible player in this dangerous game that's being played in the Middle East. But propaganda being what propaganda is, the West and Israel has successfully painted a picture. My dogs are agreeing that shapes public opinion, and it will take time to overcome that. Just like it took time to get Israel to walk away from its assassination plans and accept Saddam as a rational actor. So this isn't something that's going to happen overnight.
I was wondering if we have lost an opportunity. We could have had the IAEA was checking up on Iran. We could have had a written agreement, and now that this attack on Fordo and the other nuclear sites happened, we don't know where the nuclear material is.
Well, we don't know where the material is. We don't even know, the interesting thing about bombing, the stupidity of bombing, is that we had a very good accounting for the totality of Iran's nuclear capabilities with the IAEA. Now that the IAEA inspections have stopped, and indeed Iran is talking about ceasing cooperation altogether, and bombing has happened, um, we've created a nightmare in terms of verification. Uh, because all Iran has to do is say, well, yeah, you just destroyed 2,000 of our most advanced centrifuges. They're buried in the mountain. And how do you confirm that? Meanwhile, if Iran evacuated it, now they have 2,000 centrifuges that are unaccounted for. This is just stupidity in the extreme, the dumbest thing we've ever done, which is all the more reason why we need to be responsible in our dealing with Iran. We need to allow them 3.75% enriched uranium. But in exchange for that, Iran needs to work with us openly and transparently about accounting for destroyed material and bringing their activities under adequate supervision so that the world can rest easy that there is no Iranian nuclear weapons program. Well, a big roadblock, though, is going to be the International Atomic Energy Agency because they've lost all credibility. Their Director General Grossi has been working hand in glove with Israeli intelligence, with the CIA, to transform very sensitive data collected by the weapons inspectors, the detailed, the layout of Iran's nuclear infrastructure, and this data was turned into targets which Israel acted upon and the United States acted upon. So how can they be trusted again? There's going
Can anyone trust them again? I mean, will other countries even trust them?
That's a good question. I think the way to address this is to, yes, we're going to need to reform the IAEA. Yes, Grossi should have to resign. And yes, the inspection team needs to be shook up. Anybody that was involved in any sort of intelligence sharing needs to be removed. and new leadership brought in. But the most important thing is that Israel must be delinked from the NPT. Israel is not a signatory to the NPT. There's no reason for Israel to have any relationship with the IAEA, and indeed, Israel should be shunned, banned from the IAEA, any activity, any dealing with the IAEA until which time it wants to join the NPT and subject its nuclear programs to full scrutiny. But right now, Israel literally has the run of Vienna. I experienced this when I was a weapons inspector with UNSCOM, the degree to which Israel had infiltrated the IAEA. And this can't be allowed to happen. Israel does not have a vested interest in anything the IAEA does unless it's going to be a member of the IAEA. Until that time, Israel should be treated as a hostile party.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's gone kind of unremarked on, in the conversation so far is just the extreme irony that we're very concerned about Iran having a nuclear weapon, which from Iran's perspective, they would want this because it's like sort of the ultimate defense card, right? Countries want nukes, not so much for prestige or because they have someone they want to drop it on, but because it is a great way to defend yourself from external aggression, because people are typically have been more cautious about attacking nuclear powers. And meanwhile, you've got the United States attacking Iran, Israel attacking Iran, the U.S. being the only country to have used nuclear weapons on in a war, and Israel having this entire arsenal of nuclear weapons that it is not declared, which is not a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and these are acting as sort of like private police to like police the world's nuclear security when they are, in fact, we are the grossest offenders.
Well, we are the grossest offenders, but I just want to make a couple points. Russia has an extensive nuclear arsenal. In fact, it's the largest in the world, and this hasn't precluded Ukraine from launching a series of attacks against Russian infrastructure, including Russian strategic bombers and Russian strategic assets. So having nuclear weapons does not save you from conventional attack. Israel has a very large nuclear arsenal, and that didn't protect them from being.
Yeah, if I can, yeah, I kind of hedged when I said that because it has traditionally been the case that if you were a nuclear armed country, attacks against you would cease because no one would be stupid enough to mess with you. But now it seems like that level of stupid is right there, and we are just eager to start World War III. So I take your point very, very seriously, and I acknowledge that. Go on.
Well, I'm just saying that nuclear weapons provide no shield whatsoever because to have the weapon, you have to use the weapon. And no nation will use the weapon because of the taboo that's been in place since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So I think nuclear weapons is an artificial crutch. First of all, there's some artificialities have been put out there. Saddam gave up his nuclear bomb, therefore Saddam went away. No, Saddam didn't give up his nuclear bomb. Saddam never had a nuclear bomb. Saddam had a crash program to build a nuclear bomb that may or may not have been able to reach fruition. We don't know because he lost a war. And then after war, he was compelled to surrender, his capabilities had not yet reached maturity. But Saddam went away not because he gave up a nuclear weapon. He went away because he invaded Kuwait, because he was perceived as posing a threat to Israel and Saudi Arabia's oil. It was larger geopolitical concerns about the removal of Saddam Hussein that had nothing to do with nuclear weapons at all. So it's wrong to say if Saddam had a nuclear bomb, everything would have been okay. If Saddam had a nuclear bomb, then the solution to Saddam would have been an American nuclear bomb, a larger nuclear weapon. The same thing with Libya. Libya gave up the potential to develop nuclear capability when early on in their process of acquiring centrifuges, they were caught. But the reason why Libya gave it up wasn't, about protecting, securing themselves. They gave it up because they were exchanging that for the lifting of sanctions linked to the 1986 Pan Am bombing over Lockerbie Scotland and the normalization of relations, the circumstances that led to Muammar Gaddafi's fall in 2011 had nothing to do with his surrendering of his nuclear capability. I'm just here to tell you, if you're a small nation and you have nuclear bombs, the solution to you is more nuclear bombs, which we have. North Korea is an example. In 1994, we almost went to war against North Korea. North Korea was an aspiring nuclear power at the time, but the thing that stopped us from going to war wasn't a nuclear weapon. It was 30,000 North Korean artillery pieces dug into the mountains across the river from Seoul, knowing that if a war started, Seoul would cease to exist. 9 million people's lives would be put at risk. If the only problem we face with North Korea is a nuclear problem, I guarantee you the solution is that we destroy North Korea using overwhelming nuclear power. Nuclear weapons are not a safeguard. This is what I try to tell the people who argue that if Iran had a nuclear bomb, they'd be safe. No, if Iran had a nuclear bomb, they'd be dead, because our response would have been nuclear. We would have used nuclear weapons to eliminate that threat and eliminate the government that was threatening the world with that weapon. So the Iranian government has been very smart and very wise in avoiding this trap. They don't need a nuclear weapon. They were able to attack Israel without a nuclear weapon, do significant damage to Israel without a nuclear weapon. There was no Israeli nuclear retaliation. I think nuclear. I think this concept that everybody's going to be rushing to get a nuclear weapon is a flawed concept, because I think most nations realize today that nuclear weapons are a double-edged sword. You have them, but you can't use them, because the second you use them, you will die. And in most scenarios that are out there, when you have conflict with other nations, aren't suicide scenarios. So, for instance, when Pakistan and India fight over Kashmir, neither side wants to die on behalf of Kashmir, which is why they don't use nuclear weapons.
I think all of that is well taken. I'm not sure I 100% agree with all of it, but I will defer to you. I'm not in a position to argue with any of it with you. I think that all is all very smart, and I'm glad we're hearing it from you. So one of the things that I find, I mean, nothing is ever easy to decipher at face value, particularly with this administration, right? Because I mean, to give you an example, you had the vice president of the United States saying, the United States has no interest in regime change. He was on some interview saying this. And like an hour later on social media, Trump is saying, why wouldn't we be in favor of regime change if the current regime doesn't want to make Iran great? Make Iran great again. And it's like, MEGA. And it's like, I mean, obviously that's not our job. But it's, this type of kind of consistent mixed messaging, and it's particularly bad from Trump, who was sort of all over the map prior to this entry into the war, and everyone was kind of wondering, like, is he going to do something? And of course, there's no effort to go through Congress. There's no effort to start like a long-term rollout propaganda campaign to like say why we needed to do something. It just everyone's sort of like sitting and wondering what's going to happen as he sort of says we're going to attack and we're not going to attack and we are going to attack, we're not going to attack. And so it's like, I don't know, just throwing that out.
Well, I mean, that might be part of the madness of Donald Trump, is basically to leave everybody confused and wondering where you're going and what you're going to do. It may be not even knowing yourself. And then when the time comes where a situation is developed, you have a wide range of options of actions to take, any of which you could say, this is what I said I was going to do all along. It's not good leadership. It's not sound, but it's Donald Trump. I mean, we have a man-child as president who tweets like a teenager, and what do you expect?
I think we've observed once when we were talking to you, probably when we were talking about Russia and Ukraine, that that type of unpredictability is particularly, terrifying when you have, nuclear powers involved, when there's a certain level of trust that needs to be acquired so that the two sides can talk about how to reduce the possibility of some sort of nuclear conflict. And here you've got, I mean, however serious or not serious it is in terms of how much is propaganda and how because I mean, let's be fair. We've been told that Iran was 10 seconds away from a nuclear weapon for the last 30 years. So, they have a nuclear program. They are enriching uranium, but just to the degree to which this was something that was imminent is obviously, you know,
Questionable.
yeah, highly propagandized. Um, but
let me just push back a little bit here because
sure.
as sympathetic as I am to the Iranians, and I will not defend what Israel did by any stretch of the imagination, nor will I defend the position taken by the Trump administration. But last October, I published an article in Consortium News where I said Iran is already a nuclear power. And it's not just my assessment, but it was the words of the Iranians themselves. Iran has no justification in terms of its existing peaceful nuclear program to possess uranium enriched above 20%. The majority of the uranium should be enriched to 3.75%, which is usable as a nuclear fuel in the Bushehr reactor or any other power generation reactor they may want to install. 20% is the fuel needed to power the Tehran research reactor, which is used for medical isotopes and other research development. The limited amount, but when Iran was denied the opportunity to procure 20% fuel abroad, they raised their enrichment to 20% to produce that fuel, legitimate. But now they've taken it up to 60%. 60% is one enrichment cycle away from weapons grade uranium. And as I've pointed out repeatedly, this puts them in the position of being a threshold nuclear power. That's unacceptable. See, Iran's not allowed to be a threshold nuclear power because Iran's not allowed to have nuclear weapons. Iran is signed to the NPT as a non-nuclear weapons state, and Iran has made commitments that it will not pursue nuclear weapons. So there's no reason for them to have 60% enriched uranium other than Iran using that as leverage. But when you say using it as leverage, I mean, they're trying to get people to come to the table to negotiate in good faith. But it's leverage that says, if you don't do this, then we can do this, which is unacceptable. So when the United States and Israel say that Iran was a threshold state, they were 100% correct. And it gets worse than that because the Iranians condemned themselves with their own words. People close to the supreme leader spoke about the reversibility of the fatwa that prohibited nuclear weapons. Everybody in Iran always said, well, we have a fatwa, we have a religious edict, we're not allowed to have nuclear weapons. But suddenly we're told by people close to the supreme leader that if circumstances evolve, for instance, if Israel were to attack Iran's nuclear sites, I want people to remember this, the fatwa could be reversed, and that Iran could therefore deem nuclear weapons to be compatible with Islam because they would be involved in the defense of Islam against an existential threat. So the fatwa is now reversible. Iran has 60% enriched uranium, and then multiple Iranian personalities close to the Iranian nuclear program said that they have assembled all the components necessary for a nuclear weapon, and that if the decision is made, they are weeks away from having a functioning nuclear weapon. That means they are a nuclear power minus 2 weeks. That's unacceptable. And had it been left at that, I'm just here to tell you, I know nobody wants to hear this, but that represents a threat, and it represents a threat to global nonproliferation, and military action would be justifiable as long as you went through the due process of adequate notifications, etc. But Iran has no right for a nuclear weapon. I don't want to hear about Israel because that doesn't factor into the equation. Iran signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. There's no Israeli escape clause. And they've made a decision. Now, what mitigates this, against this, is that Iran, through negotiations starting in April 14th, agreed to resolve all of these issues. They agreed to get rid of their 60% enriched uranium. They agreed to sign a treaty, a binding treaty with verification means attached to say they will never have a nuclear weapon. So that solves the issue of the reversible fatwa. You eliminate 60%, You get a treaty, you cap enrichment at 3.75%, and suddenly there is no Iranian nuclear threat. And that's where we were. That's the negotiation that was on the table. Ali Shamkhani, one of the lead Iranian nuclear negotiators before he was murdered by the Israelis, gave an interview where he laid all this out. And that meant that Iran was no longer a nuclear threshold state, that Iran was walking away from that, getting back to where they needed to be under international law. And therefore, you cannot articulate an imminent threat. See, in order to justify military strike, preemptive military action, you have to articulate an imminent threat that can only be resolved through military force. Prior to Iran's agreement, I would say that it would be very easy to make cognizable the argument that Iran represented an imminent threat to international peace and security because of its threshold status. But you can't say that once they agree to negotiations. So Israel carried out an illegal war of aggression, an act of perfidy facilitated by the United States, who knew the negotiations we were engaged in weren't designed to achieve a negotiated outcome, but were literally designed to lull the Iranians into a false sense of complacency for this decapitation strike that took place. Donald Trump and Marco Rubio have acknowledged that the decision to bomb Iran was made on March 7th. A joint decision by Israel and the United States. Negotiations began on April 14th, and the negotiations were never meant to resolve the issue, but rather to buy time until the Iranians have been lulled into complacency. But I think we have to be careful about, what I tell the Iranians, and I've said this to their face. Don't wave the red flag and then cry when the bull charges. Don't become a nuclear threshold state and then complain when you get attacked.
Yeah, regardless of whether it can be justified, right? And I think everything you've said tracks, but it just seems like you'd have to be very desperate to do something that was that foolish. Because when you were talking before about how having a nuclear weapon doesn't protect you, one of the first things that I thought of is like, well, having a nuclear weapon may not protect you, but it's the most dangerous place you can be is the position where you're about to have a nuclear weapon. That is like the most dangerous step, right? Because at that point, you do not really have a credible immediate threat to someone. You cannot use that to stop them from striking you today if you're going to have a bomb in a week. So at that point, you're most vulnerable, and also there is the most impulse to destroy you. So that is, like, in my mind at least, still the most dangerous point you can be at. And to put yourself at that point and sort of just try to hold yourself at that point as a threat seems like a very foolish maneuver.
And yet that's what they did by their own admission. And they've been doing that since October of last year. And they didn't reverse that foolish maneuver until April, when they suddenly said, okay, we're willing to consider a wide range of options. But now let me put something else out here. The Iranians said if their nuclear infrastructure was ever attacked, that they could withdraw from the NPT, that they could reverse the fatwa, that they could move forward on building a bomb. So guess what we've done? We've cleared the way for Iran to build a bomb should they want to. And I want to remind people that none of their 60% enriched uranium was destroyed in this strike. Iran has all of it. It's under safeguard. 400 kilograms. 400 kilograms, if enriched to 92%, will give you material for 3 to 5 nuclear weapons. All of the infrastructure necessary to enrich and to turn into metal has been retained by Iran. We're just getting reports out now. Everybody's coming out that Iran has numerous so-called secret nuclear facilities. Well, they didn't have numerous secret facilities, but let me give you a little background on Fordow. Fordow, the underground facility that the United States struck with 14 massive ordnance penetrators, wasn't designed to be a centrifuge enrichment facility. It was designed to be an evacuation site, meaning that it was built with the evacuation of Iranian normal Iranian factory equipment, etc. In case of a large-scale war with the United States, Iran would evacuate sensitive equipment out of industrial facilities to dozens of underground evacuation sites that had been built around Iran. Um, and so Firdo already existed, was already dug out. And what Iran did is when they found out that Israel and the United States were talking about bombing Natanz, Iran said, in order to preserve our enrichment capability, we need a backup. We need a survivable enrichment capability. So they converted the Ferdo evacuation site into the underground um, enrichment site, and they began to install centrifuges there. But around Iran, as we speak, are dozens of similar facilities dug deep into the mountainsides, um, which have been now converted into nuclear evacuation sites. And it won't take too much stretch of imagination to turn a nuclear evacuation site into a functioning nuclear enrichment plant, a uranium conversion facility, and even a weaponization facility. But now we don't know where these sites are. We don't have inspectors on the ground. We're actually in a very, very dangerous situation right now because we have a
We
ceasefire.
multiplied the problem.
We made this problem so much bigger. It's not even funny because now what will happen is imaginations will go wild. And now you'll have Israel and the United States both talking about we need to immediately get this equipment. Watch what's going to happen in the coming weeks. You must immediately allow the IAEA inspectors access. You must immediately turn this over. And Iran's going to say no. And we'll be right back to square one. Now, the smart move is for Iran to say no, not until we have a completed deal. When we have a deal, we'll get back to business, but we're not going to preempt a deal by giving away all of our cards. If you want this material, then we need a deal, a final deal, and then begin negotiations that way. But we're in a very dangerous situation because I've seen this before. I remember when UN inspectors left Iraq back in December of 1998, ordered out by Bill Clinton, not kicked out by the Iraqis, between December 1998 and October of 2002, the United States began to manufacture a case against Iraq that said they have reconstituted their weapons of mass destruction programs. But there was no way to refute them because we didn't have inspectors on the ground. And so the United States was able to build up this fantastic story, just full of all the detail that defectors can bring. None of it was true.
Oh.
And it was exposed as a lie when inspectors were allowed to return to work in November of 2002. But it didn't matter. The U.S. had already made a decision to go to war, and we went to war in March of 2003. But my point is now, watch the lies that come out. Watch the speculation that comes out of Washington, D.C. and Tel Aviv about Iran's nuclear capabilities. Watch it because you're going to see it spin out of control. But the reality is they don't know what they're talking about. And two, it's the lie is done deliberately to create the conditions for military action.
Is there anyone in the area or other major powers such as China or Russia who could assist in kind of tamping things down, negotiating things, doing anything like that?
Well, I mean, there's the potential there. I do think that Russia and China should form an interim investigation capability, recognizing the corruption of the IAEA, to step in and establish an interim authority that would seek to bring Iran's program under some sort of supervision. That could be a possibility, um, and but again, I said this is an extraordinarily dangerous situation. The IAEA has no more credibility. They are complicit in the attack that took place. And why then would Iran say, well, come on in and we'll show you where the stuff is now, knowing that that would be shared and then be used by any subsequent attack? So I think, unless we find some sort of interim authority, I had proposed something back in 2002, 2003 in an effort to prevent a war, what I called the trusted agent, where the Iraqis would invite a trusted agent to come in and do the work of interim inspections, but we never had a chance to to do that. Instead, I went to Iraq and convinced the Iraqis to allow the inspectors back in without preconditions. But that was a new inspection regime, UNMOVIC, not UNSCOM, and they took measures to prevent their information being used haphazardly. The IAEA, as it's currently configured, cannot be trusted.
So what can we do now? Um, there were, some protests around the country in terms of trying to say no to war against Iran. And I don't know to what extent those were an influence on the Trump administration, to what extent things just sort of went according to what they had planned, or whether it was simply just the fact that, Israel's nose was bloodied more than they expected, and hundreds of thousands of Israelis were trying to leave the country. There's a lot that could be said about that, but what can we do now to try to alleviate the danger? What should we be pressing for?
Well, we're sort of out of time. What's going to happen is going to happen. There's not a timeline normally associated with civil disobedience, and standard protests usually need a large lead time to develop sort of a momentum of demonstrations, to develop public support, etc. Um, I think what we have to do is plan for success. And what I mean by that is, get into the hope and prayer that there is a treaty possibility, negotiations, maybe continue to articulate in favor of that, but plan for victory. Do what is achievable, not what you would like to happen. I just think it's unrealistic to think that demonstrations at this point in time is going to alter policy. We're too far in. The cat is out of the bag. It's not going to. So, what to do in the future? I think one of the problems we face with Iran is a similar problem we face with Russia. With Russia, we have Russophobia, this irrational fear and hatred of Russia that's derived from a total ignorance about the reality of Russia. Um, Iran, I don't know if the appropriate term is Iranophobia, or I'll make it up if it isn't. But we have the same thing: this irrational fear and ignorance of all things dealing with Iran, misperceptions, etc. Um, to the extent that actions can be taken to educate the American public about the reality of Iran, to encourage people to people contact. I know it's tough to go to Iran right now, and it would be a fool's errand. I wouldn't encourage. As much I've been to Iran, and as much as I would tell people they should go to Iran, it's irrational to talk about going to Iran under the current circumstances. But that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that we can't take advantage of the internet and have. I just did last week a citizen summit with Russians, a very successful summit. There's no reason why we couldn't hold a citizen summit with the people of Iran. In fact, I'm going to be working on organizing such a summit in the not too distant future, to have to give the people of Iran an opportunity to talk to American citizens and begin a dialogue, to impress on Americans that these are human beings with they may have different religion, different culture, different language, but at the end of the day, they want the same things for their children that we want, and therefore peace is the only option. Um, that's the sort of thing that I would be encouraging at this point in time, is to pray that we avoid a war, but prepare for success. To try and, in the military we called it intelligence preparation to the battlefield, to prep the battlefield for success. So if we avoid a war and we're able to get a nuclear deal, how do we move forward? And if we start preparing the battlefield by encouraging people to people discussion, we eliminate many of the obstacles that might stand in the way of normalization of relations.
So
Well, that sounds hopeful.
so go visit Tehran, but you can't go physically right now, so go virtually.
That's what I would recommend at this point in time. Not just Tehran, but all of Iran. It's a
Yeah.
beautiful country with a great diversity, wonderful people, beautiful. It is literally. Um, there's people that, you go out in the West for the first time in the Western United States, and you see the Rocky Mountains, you see the expanse, and people, their breath is taken away. Much of Iran is the same way. It's just a very beautiful country, especially as you get into the north, into the mountains. Um, Americans would be shocked about just how beautiful the place is. And I think also shocked about how wonderfully warm and open the Iranian people are. We keep hearing talk about death to America, but people need to understand the context of that. The 1953 overthrow of Mossadegh, the installation of the Shah of Iran, the suppression of the Iranian people by the Savak, the Secret Service trained by the CIA for that purpose.
The Iran-Iraq War.
The Iran-Iraq War. Well, the Iranians took over the embassy in anger. They found documents that confirmed the duplicity and complicity of America in there. And this is where death to America came from. But even as Iranians say death to America to the camera, as an American who showed up in the first months of Ahmadinejad's presidency, a man who was not known for his for his positive image of the United States, I could walk the streets of southern Tehran, which was Ahmadinejad's stronghold, and be invited into every tea shop, every garage, every place I went. When they found out I was American, there was no hostility, none, zero. They wanted me to come in. They wanted to talk about America. They wanted to know why I was there. They were so happy that I was there. And this is the reality.
I've heard that expressed about a lot of countries, right? That the people there separate the American people from their government. They don't think that that the government represents the people. They understand that people have different views. And there's a, I mean, I saw this particularly with Iran. There was an old 60 Minutes episode. I don't remember when it aired, but it's like, they were very, very warm towards the reporters who like walked around. They knew they were Americans. They greeted them, they hugged them, and they explained all the problems they had with the United States, and everything that the United States, that they blamed the United States for, but they didn't blame the people, right? They didn't hold it against the visitor, right? They just said, you've got to go back and tell your government to stop all this, but we like you. So I think we're at the end of our time. Thank you very, very much for being on the show. You were great. We got a lot of information, and love to have you back anytime.
Any last
Thank
words?
you very much. It was a pleasure.
All right. Thanks to Scott Ritter, and we are always glad to have you back.
All right. Thanks a lot. Have a good day, guys.
Thanks. Bye-bye.